she's trying to look for her father, she ends up being with these guys trying to get help looking for them because they're looking for him too. And because he was conducting experiments that, well, I'm not trying to spoil it too much, but he was conducting experiments, and let's just say there's demons in here, and he was making psychotic half demons. Hijikata thought for a moment before he spoke. He gave a derisive bark of laughter. That's a new word. He looked directly at me, and I got the distinct feeling his words weren't for his companions. It was common for people to be murdered in Kyoto. It was a dangerous city, after all. I knew that, of course. But to see it happen, that was something else entirely. If death was such an easy thing in Kyoto, I thought, then the city itself must surely be mad. Huh? I didn't realize right away he was speaking to me. When I did, my eyes went wide. What do you mean, you saved me? Well, he did have a point. Despite their threats, they saved my life. I stood up as steadily as I could manage, brushed some dirt off my clothes, and bowed. Thank you very much. I apologize for not thanking you earlier. There was so much going on, I was a little confused. I glanced up at them tenaciously. The man called Hajime also looked confused. His eyes were wide and he had an expression I couldn't place. Hijikata looked as though he'd taken a bite of something sour. I sighed deeply before continuing. I know it seems weird to say that, but he told me I should say thanks, so I looked up. Sato and Hijikata both stared pointlessly at anything but me, and the third man was shaking with laughter. He broke out in laughter again, so much that he was forced to wipe a few tears from his eyes as he straightened up. Thank you for helping me. Not quite sure what else to do, I bowed again. Whatever mirth was inspired was gone. The man called Sato now spoke with quiet urgency. The man named Okita grabbed hold of my wrist, smiled, and led us down the street. His grip was a touch too tight to be friendly, his fingers like iron cables around my arm. There was no question about my situation. I quickly picked up the notion that if I were to run, I would be killed instantly. My life was in the hands of these strange men. I set my jaw and stood up as straight as I could. My eyes crept up from the bloodstained coat and met Sato's gaze. His words were like daggers in my stomach. What was going to happen to me? Was I going to die? As we walked through the bleak Kyoto night, I felt horror crawl its way up my spine once again. The cause of my horror wasn't the gruesome end that awaited me, but something else entirely. I spoke with these men and watched them speak, standing next to a warm corpse soaked in blood. That I had done such a thing terrified me in an altogether different way. Perhaps this is what it is like to go mad. Oh my goodness, my back. I take it there's an intro for every chapter then? I could get used to this. Wrong anime!
There's my boys. I might go with if I ever play the game.
Okay, out of all these guys, who would you pick?
Oh, you said between. I'm always into the quiet and rambunctious ones when you showed me those two in the second column. I don't know their names.
I love this music. But again, those characters I never saw in the anime or the movie.
The thing I don't understand is you said she's pretending to be a boy, but she still looks like a girl.
Yeah, but all the guys have long hair, so I
know,
mean,
but she wears very like bright kimonos and shit.
she has like a salmon color kimono. Can you hand me that pillow right there? I'm like having a cramp right here on my back and it hurts. Nobody makes me bleed my own blood. Chapter 1. Yeah, buddy. What kind of shit is about to go down? I'm sorry, I'm like adjusting. I really hurt my back. I was doing kind of like delicate work earlier and I was slouching a lot because my son decided to shove a toy in to my PS4 where the disc in the disc area, and I couldn't get it out for a bit. It took forever, and luckily I did get it out, but I was slouching so much, trying to like hunch over and see where it is inside. I hurt my back. So now I'm trying to like sit up straight, but it's just not agreeing with me. It's not at all. I could lean back, but my character's gonna look like all far back, like it is a little sluggish. So, alright. Let us continue. Was it morning? What happened to me? I attempted to recollect myself. Yes. I remember. Right. All at once, the events of the previous night rushed back to me. This isn't my room. My limbs were snugly bound in tight knots, so all I could do was wiggle around in bed, twisting the blankets around me. I yearned for the comfort of my own futon, but the futility of such thoughts only forced me to confront the reality of my situation. I ran out of breath. If only I could wake from this strange nightmare. But I could not. Those men from the night before must have taken me with them to the headquarters of the Shinsengumi. What will happen to me now? I inhaled deeply, lying down to await my fate. It was at that moment the door slid open. A kind-looking man stepped through. His smile quirked as he removed my ropes. My wrists, however, were left bound. And you are? Thank you, Inoue. Okay. I nodded curtly and struggled to stand, but my body was sore from being bound up all night. Inoue treated me with something like courtesy, but it was clear that I was in a lesser position. He must have been able to guess my thoughts, however, because he smiled at me and winked. Oh. Even at home, I heard rumors of the vicious Shinsengumi that were unflattering.
Apparently, we're all gonna date them. Daddy, I'm dating the Shinsengumi. Daddy proceeds to die.
They're safer than most men nowadays.
That's not foreshadowing anything.
Aha!
Aren't most of your watchers men?
No, honestly, I don't know. It was hard to imagine that the people in charge of such an organization were gentlemen. Despite Inoue's reassurance, it was difficult for me to trust what I was hearing as accurate. Excuse me? He led me to a room and opened the door. I stepped inside and found myself surrounded by the leaders of the Shinsengumi. Their eyes dug into me like sharp knives. I stared before me and then gulped nervously. Well, it wasn't practically comfortable. Well, what? Quite silent, I stared at Okita. With his grin still spread along his face, he glanced over at Sato. I don't think Sato did anything wrong. You, on the other hand. Hijikata's voice brooked no further insubordination. Okita shrugged and fell silent, but the smile lingered through his bright eyes. The man who spoke was, well, he looked more like a boy than a man. Maybe this is the youthful Shinzengumi captain that Inoue was describing to me. I'd imagine the leaders of the Shinzengumi to be older, maybe even middle-aged men, but their faces were still blessed with youth. In fact, one might even confuse them at first glance for a gang of bohemian thugs. With abs.
God damn.
That's where they zoomed in on. That's why I was like, okay.
Jesus.
お前がガキとか言うのよ、平介。だな、世間様から見りゃ、平介もこいつも似たようなもんだろうよ。ガキ扱いしていいのは、俺みたいな立派な大人になってからだぜ。立派な大人って、まあ、新八が言っても説得力も何もねえがな。
Two nearby men replied to Toto, with very mocking but light-hearted tones. I somewhat recall Inoue's description of the two energetic members. His mention of them was brief, but seeing them in person was an eye-opening experience. He said the short-haired one was Nagakura, and the other with longer hair was Harada? I'm probably butchering the fuck out of these names.
うるさいな。おじさん二人は黙ってなよ。ふざけんなよ、このお坊ちゃまが。俺らにそんな口聞いていいと思ってんのか？平助におじさん呼ばわりされるほど年は食ってねえよ。新八は俺はな。てめえ、裏切るのか佐野。へへ、新八さん図星されて怒るって大人げねえよな。
Their back and forth rapport seemed developed into a rhythm from years of friendship, which predated my arrival and made me foreign here. I sensed something apart from curiosity towards me, though like a feeling of animosity. Despite their cheerful levity, they had not forgiven my presence among them. Suddenly, I wanted very much to go home. I wanted to leave this place and never return. My chest tightened and I stared down, hoping to wake up in bed with all of this only a memory. Oh. His voice was calm and warm, and I felt myself relax, even if only a little bit. As he finished speaking, the rest of the men nodded solemnly in agreement. I wondered who could possibly command such fear and respect from these men.
の副長まで何をおっしゃるんです。私はいつだって新選組の規範を第一に考えているだけですよ。その規範ご法度を決めたのは土方君じゃなかったですか。
確かに決めたのは俺だ。今はそんなことを言ってる時じゃねえだろ。
The man called Sanin and Hijikata stared at one another with a smirk.
星と三男君は相変わらず仲が良いな。
Hijikata and Sanin sounded distant when they spoke to one another, not exactly friendly. Still, the man who spoke had certainly sounded as though he thought they were friends.
ああ、自己紹介が俺だな。俺が新選組局長近藤勇だ。
When you say chief, do you mean to say you are the most important man in the Shinzengumi?
いや、まあ俺が偉いわけじゃない。皆の代表ということだよ。それからそこの都市が副長で、横にいる三男君は総長を務めていて。
いや、近藤さん、なんでいろいろ教えてやってんだよ、あんたは。
まずいのか。
情報を与える必要がないんだったら黙ってる方が得策なんじゃないですかね。
わざわざ教えてやるきりはないと思うけど。
確かにそうなんだが、紹介しないことには話が進まんだろう。
Harada glanced over at Kondo and let out a bark of laughter.
ここまで来たら知られて困ることもねえけどな。
Kondo had looked over, rather disappointed when Hijikata spoke, but he perked up at Harada. God, I'm butchering these names.
Good job.
Despite knowing him for 5 minutes, it's easy to see that his words resonated well with his men. He had a sort of charisma that simply drew you in, a man who was impossible to hate.
さて、本題に入ろう。まずは改めて昨晩の話を聞かせてくれ。
昨晩京の都を夜間巡察中、愚弄の老子と末相手が刀を抜い切り合いとなりました。一部の大使らが老子を無力化しました。その後、彼らが失敗した様子をこの者に目撃されています。
It's in a bag on the second shelf.
I'm getting hungry, man.
As he finished, Sato turned to look at me. I didn't see anything. Even with my insistence, Hijikata continued to stare at me with a harsh glance. Sato remained expressionless, and the smile on Okita's face didn't change.
なあ、お前本当に何も見てないの？
Yes, I didn't see anything.
見てないんならいいんだけどさ。
あれ、掃除の話じゃお前が大使どもを助けてくれたって話だったの。
No, that's not true. I glanced over at Okita, but his smile remained. Whatever he was thinking was a mystery to me. I was running away from the Ronin. Then some people with Shinsegumi uniforms appeared. Really, they sort of rescued me?
大使どもが老子を切り殺してる場面はしっかり見たってわかる。
I couldn't exactly deny that. However, I knew that choosing to stay silent would implicate me deeper than lying
つ
would.
まり最初から最後まで一部始終を見てた。 根が素直なんだろうな。それ自体は悪いことじゃないんだろう。
I wasn't sure what to make of Harada's words. My presence seemed bad for the Shinsengumi. Would their next words be ones condemning me to death for being at the wrong place at the wrong time? My voice shook, but I knew I had to try. I won't tell anyone, I promise.
偶然老師に絡まれていたという君が私たちに敵対するものとまでは言いませんね。君の言うつもりがなくても相手の誘導尋問に乗せられる可能性はある。
His voice was still warm, but his words were cold, and I began to feel my chance at life slip away.
話さないというのは簡単だ。この者が新選組に義理立てする理由だ。
約束を破らない保証なんてないですし、やっぱり解放するのは難しいですよね。ほら、殺しちゃいましょうよ。口封じするならそれが一番じゃないですか。
But
そうじ、物騒なことを言うな。お上の民をむやみに殺して何とする。
そんな顔しないでくださいよ。今のはただの冗談ですから。
あんたは冗談に聞こえる冗談だ。
after being rebuked by Sato, Okita gave a playful smile.
しかし、なんとかならんのかね。まだこんな子供だろう。
私も何とかしてあげたいとは思いますが、うっかり漏らされでもしたら一大事です。私は副長のご意見を伺いたいのですが、いかがですか、土方副長。
The men looked at Hijikata, listening intently. He sighed and glanced around the room.
俺たちは昨晩、指導に背いた大使を粛清した。こいつはその現場に居合わせ。
それだけで知りたいんです。
実際このガキの認識なんざその程度のものだとは思う。
けどよ、こればっかりは大義のためにも内密にしなきゃなんねえことだよな。新選組の大使は血に狂ってるなんて噂が立ちゃ、俺らのタイムにだって支障が出るぜ。
Senpachi's words made sense to everyone. Hijikata's face looked grim.
おい、言葉を慎め。俺は指導に背いた大使を粛清した。
でもまあ、どっちみち見たことは変わらないんですけどね。
宗司の意見にも一理あると思うが、俺は土方さんや近藤さんの決定にした。
俺は逃がしてやってもいいと思う。こいつは別にあいつらが血に狂った理由を知っちまったわけでもないんだしさ。
What do you mean, everything? I couldn't help but wonder aloud, and the mood in the room shifted to an icy silence.